Yo, what is going on, fam? Keezy here from Black Market. Welcome to the channel. In today's video, and probably over the course of the next few videos, we're going to be talking all about how you can create super realistic print halftone effects right inside of Adobe Photoshop using Black Market Inklab. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button and also the bell notification button so that you get notifications when we upload a new video. In this video, we'll be walking through the Inklab UI, and I will talk about the main features of Inklab and how they work, and give some crucial tips that I think will help the majority of you who have had issues with Inklab so far resolve those, mostly related to image size, DPI, things like that. So all of that and more in this video. Stick around. Without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so here we are inside of Adobe Photoshop, and as you can see, I've already got Inklab open. There are two ways to open Inklab. You can do Control F on the keyboard and search for Inklab, and clicking this Inklab panel result will open Inklab. Alternatively, you can go Window, Extensions, Inklab, and open it that way. Moving on to the Inklab interface here, at the top we've got the action bar, which contains the preset select dropdown, as well as buttons to add or remove a custom preset. So if you click the add preset button, you'd be prompted with a name box, and I could say tutorial, and click enter, and now I have my custom preset saved with any colors, screen angles, effects, processing modes, etc. that I may have set. Similarly, I can delete the preset with the same method just by clicking this minus. There is no warning message that appears, so if you click the minus button, it will delete it. Be warned of that. Right beside the preset select, we have the play button. Clicking this button will run Inklab. Directly underneath the action bar, we have our targeting options. There is one for canvas, which targets the entire canvas. Selection targets only the current selection. So if you make, say, a selection like this, Inklab is only going to affect the area in the circle. And similarly with layer, if we were to run it now, since I have layer 1 selected and it is the active layer, if I were to have layer targeting selected, it would only run Inklab here on layer 1. Moving down, we have the packs panel. The packs panel is essentially a microtransaction store. This is where we will upload Inklab add-ons. In the future, there will be more than just the two here now, but for now we have two preset packs. So I'll walk you through the process. If you wanted to say buy these presets by Motel, which are for free, you can click buy. It will redirect you to the Black Market website, and you can click buy now. Walk through this checkout process. Being as these are free, you don't need to enter any payment information, simply your name, zip code, and email address, and then click pay 0 now. You'll be greeted with a key. Enter this key inside of Inklab and click redeem. Voila, the presets have been added, and you can see them here in the preset select. So we can click them now, and it will cycle through our different various presets and the settings contained within each. One other thing about the packs panel is that it is live, and as we add new products, they will appear in the packs panel, no update required. So this is pulling live from the website. And so over time, you will likely see the packs panel change. The process panel is really where all of the magic happens. So inside of Inklab, you have 4 processing modes: basic, advanced, experimental, and separations, each with their own set of parameters that can be customized to give you different results. So, for example, in basic we have size, and then in advanced we have further conversion methods, shape, density options, and so on. The default processing mode in Inklab is basic. It is the fastest processing mode, and basic generates a series of little halftone dots that are overlaid at different angles and colors to give you the resulting image or the resulting effect. Advanced mode works a little differently. Advanced mode is a series of halftone dots, but advanced mode doesn't necessarily only rely on dots. So in advanced mode, you can get actually sharp corners and edges, and because of that, you get a lot more detail. So here is the basic processing mode on layer selection, so it's just affected only that target layer. I could press V on the keyboard and then drag this selection around. I think the effect looks pretty good, but for most people it might be too stylized. There's a couple things we can do about this. If we want to get more detail in the face, we need to reduce the size of the effect. So I'm going to take it down to a size of 5 and then run it again. Now look how much more detail we get out of a size of 5 versus a size of 10. You can clearly start to see details in the eye, such as the eyelids, eyelashes, details of the mouth and the headband here, where as a size of 10, you really just get these dots. One of the biggest questions we get is, I put an image in Inklab and I press play and all it is these big dots, and they'll send an image and it looks something like this, or maybe even something, you know, with a higher size. And so there's a couple reasons that could happen. One is that the size setting is not properly set, and the other is that in the advanced panel, the resample value is too low. The third actually is that the image size in general is too low. So if you're working with an image, say 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, you're gonna have a bad time. The image needs to be at least, I would say, 2,000 pixels on the small edge, and if it's not, you can simply use the resample here. So if you were to click into this and type 150, it is going to effectively double the amount of pixels that Inklab has to work with. So if I were to, again, run this now, and I'll put this on a size of 5 again, we will get double the amount of detail that we just did out of the previous conversion at size 5, because the previous conversion was at a DPI of 72. And so now this is the result that we get at 150 DPI with a size of 5 on the basic mode. Really clear, clean details, especially here in the eyes and in the mouth. You could start to make out the patterns on the headband very clearly. And now let's go and take a look at our first result. So this is the difference between just a couple of parameters being tweaked. We go from that to that. So the big takeaway here is that the size and the DPI, or the resample as it's called in Inklab, are the two primary options that you need to be concerned with and understand in order to drive better results. Now there's other things and other steps that we can also take to get even better results. For example, the basic mode is just that, it's the most basic mode, but if we switch to advanced, we get even more settings here, and not only do we have more settings, but advanced also has a different effect. So the outcome of advanced is different. So even if you're using a size of 10 on both, the effect that advanced gives you will be different. So advanced isn't simply additional options. Advanced is its own processing mode, and it also happens to have additional options. Advanced is based on the bitmap conversion process. So within advanced, you get the options that are available during the bitmap conversion process. So let's go ahead and run this on advanced now with the size or with the density. So that's another key note, is that density and size are a little bit different. Size is specifically related to the size of the circle, or the radius of the circle. The density, however, is more concerned with how densely packed the halftone screen is. Density could also be referred to as lines per inch if you want to be technical about it. So let's go ahead and run this with a density of 15 on advanced mode and a DPI of 150. Now, I'm also going to continue running it on layer. Okay, Inklab has finished processing, and now we can see our result with advanced mode. So this is advanced mode with a density of 15, and then this is basic mode with a density of 20. So advanced and then basic. You can see just that the way that it processes is actually a little bit different. Now I'm going to demonstrate that here by going into the Inklab output group and then going into my separations group and toggling off a few of these channels. Now look here at the black channel that this generates. We get really interesting halftone effect here, where some of the halftone pattern might bleed together. In contrast, when you look at the basic processing mode, you'll notice that the pattern really consists specifically and exclusively of dots. So this is the advanced mode, and this is the basic mode. So within basic, you only get the dots, no matter what, essentially. And with the advanced mode, the dots can bleed together and you can get things like sharp corners, which is especially useful for typography or for line drawings. And also, just from a stylistic perspective, I think the advanced mode looks a little bit better and a little bit more authentic. And there's a good reason for that, because the advanced mode is more closely related to the process that you would actually use for printing. There are all sorts of other effects that you can play with within the advanced processing mode and the other processing modes, but I don't want to spend the whole video just talking about the processing settings. I will really quickly go in and just show the separations mode though, because I think this is a highly misunderstood one. So separations mode takes your image, splits it into channels, and then gives you those channels as layers. So when you run on separations mode, you don't get any processing settings. The reason for this is because there simply are none. There's no need for any processing settings. All it's doing is splitting your channels into layers and then allowing you to further manipulate those layers as you see fit. So one thing that I like to do with separations mode is toggle threshold. And we'll talk about the effects panel more in depth later, but for now I will point out that to toggle an effect, you can click the name, and clicking the name would toggle the effect on all 4 channels, or you can simply click the 1 or the 2 or the 3 or the 4 channels that you want to target it on. In this particular case, clicking the name will toggle on all channels, which is what I want to do. Okay, so now I'm going to run the separations mode with threshold effect turned on, and you'll be able to see what this does. So as it runs, we will get the this dialog to adjust the threshold level, and it kind of lets us control the values and the range of detail shown in each level. So here for yellow, we can specify the shadow range of that. Similarly for magenta, and similarly for cyan. And so by the end of it, we get this kind of really cool pop art style effect. By the end of it, we get this really cool pop art style effect where we can further adjust by going into our output group and then the separations and toggling a couple of layers off. And this is the effect that we're left with. We can, of course, adjust the offset a little bit here and get creative with it, and maybe even adjust colors a bit further here. And there is lots of really interesting sort of creative styling things that we can do with separations mode. Again, I'm not going to spend the whole video talking about that, but I wanted to point it out because I think it's pretty misunderstood at this point. Moving on to the channels panel. The channels panel is where we have all of our settings related to ink color, screen angle and offset, and screen visibility, as well as some additional options which we'll talk about here in a second. So you can toggle the visibility of a channel simply by clicking the visibility icon on the left. You can set ink color by clicking on the ink swatch and then setting the color to whatever you want. And you can adjust the screen offset by clicking these plus or minus buttons, or by clicking into the offset and then typing a value of your choice. These values are in pixel. You can unlink the 2 values by clicking the little link icon in the middle and then setting them freely to whatever you would like. Let's talk a little bit about screen angles. I'm going to make this brief. You could do an entire video on screen angles, maybe multiple videos on screen angles. There are websites dedicated to this topic. The thing that you really need to understand is that screen angles are a science, not an art. And the screen angles that are set by default are the standard screen angles used in professional printing in a 4-color process, at least in the United States. And if you want to do custom screen angles, what you need to keep in mind is that the darkest color should have a screen angle of 45, So if you're using only black, do an angle of 45. If you're doing a 2-color process, the darkest should be 45 and the lighter should be 75. If you're doing a 3-color process, it should be the darkest at 45, the lightest at 15, and the medium color at 75. And if you're doing a 4-color process, the lightest at 0, the darkest at 45, the medium at 75, and the second lightest at 15. And so no matter what channel so if I were to put black on the cyan channel, then black is going to now take the place of the cyan ink, and it needs to run at an angle of 45 degrees. And so what these refer to here are the 4 channels in our image. In our particular case, we're using our RGB, so we only have 3 channels, but if this was a CMYK image, these would translate and relate directly to cyan, magenta, yellow, and black here. I hope that makes sense. I know there's going to be a lot of confusion around screen angles. It's something that really does take a little bit of a deeper learning endeavor, so do look that up if it's something that you struggle with. A quick read can help you tremendously with it. There's even like a list of preset good screen angles to use for different use cases, and that's what was really helpful to me. One other thing to mention regarding screen angles is that screen angles only affect the basic and advanced processing modes. Experimental and separation don't make use of screen angles, so no need to worry about them in those 2 cases. I'm going to go ahead and reset my preset here back to the 4-color process just so we get a clean slate to work with, and now we'll talk a little bit about the shadows and the background color. So shadows is basically a black channel, so the K channel, without any conversion settings applied. The reason you would want to do that is in case, well, there's a couple reasons. A, in case you need to recover detail, so if you're running Inklab on an image and the black channel is not strong enough because of the halftone processing applied, you can run shadows on top of it, and then you'll be able to recover some small details that the halftone processing might have destroyed. The second reason would be if you are running Inklab on illustration. So the shadows mode is a really good way to recover your line work in illustration. So if you want, say, all of the color details in your image to have the halftone effect applied, but you want to keep strong line work, that is what shadows is really for. As with everything else, you can set a custom color here for your shadow layer, and so this would translate to your line work color. Background is simply a background color setting, so if you'd like to set a background color, you can do that there. Finally, the last option in the channels panel is the spot color from current layer option. We will talk about this for sure because it is one that everybody asks about. So let's just type some text out. Type the word yo. And I'm going to scale it to, I don't know, about there. And then I'll move it here to the middle of my image, and I'm gonna hide the previous process that we did. It doesn't matter what color your source object is. I'm also gonna reset my process here. It doesn't matter what color this is, so yo could be any color here, but when we go to the spot color from current layer and we turn that on, we can choose a color to use. I'm going to select this orange color from this guy's pants, and then we're good to go. So I'll mention also that you need to have a layer selected in order to run the spot color from current layer. As it states here, it runs from the current layer, meaning this layer yo. It's also important to note that spot color is for objects with an alpha channel. So your logo or custom graphic or typography, those are the primary reasons that you would use it for. You could also use it for things like if you wanted to overlay cracks or glass or some sort of texture mask, it's also great for that. Let's just go ahead and click play and run this now so you can see the effect that the spot color from current layer gives. Okay, so now that it's finished running, you can see what the spot color from current layer actually does. Basically, it is taking our graphic here, in this case, this text yo, and then using it to knock out a portion of the halftone pattern, and we get these really nice edge patterns here where that happens. And then it spits it out with a series of effects applied that make it look more printed, and then gives it to us as an editable spot layer. So we can come in and Of course, edit the color further if desired, change it to whatever we would like here. Move it around, duplicate it if we want. The possibilities are endless. That is what it does. This overprint mode does the same thing except for without the knockout effect. So it would do all of the same stuff, except it's not going to cut out this area in your halftone pattern. So keep that in mind if that's the effect that you're looking for. Next up is the texture panel. The texture panel is where we can control this background texture. So if you look carefully in the Yo here in our spot channel, we have sort of a paper texture in the background, and as we move around you can kind of see other details of the texture bleeding through our image, and that can be controlled and changed here in the texture panel. So we have currently 8 different paper swatches, but you can use your own custom paper textures as well. And we will be adding more swatches in the future, likely to the packs panel for you to add and install that way. To toggle off textures entirely, you can just click this toggle button and then no texture will be output in your image, so you will get a perfectly smooth result. That's particularly useful if you're planning on exporting the screens for something like screen printing, where the texture is going to be coming from the paper itself and not necessarily in effect in Photoshop. This blend option changes how much our image blends with the background texture. So off, it won't blend at all and it will simply be multiplied. High, it will blend more. You can also control the texture completely by double clicking on the side of the separations group and then adjusting this underlying layer blend slider. So if we take the slider to the left, we will fade our image more. And if we take it to the right, we will fade our image less. So with this, we have complete control over how much texture is actually bleeding through. Completely up to you, just depends on what you're going for, what your taste is. Now we've got the effects panel. The effects panel is where we can set all sorts of different effects to automatically apply to all of our channels that are run. So all of these effects can be toggled on or off. They can be combined with each other. You can toggle an entire series of effects. So for example, if I wanted it to sharpen on all 4, it would do that. If I wanted contrast on all 4, I could click the name to do that. Or I could toggle off a couple of them and it would only run on those. So the effects are basically what they sound like. Sharpen is going to output a completely sharp result. This is particularly useful for screen printing or any sort of process where you need sharp bitmap results. Roughen is going to apply some edge damage, roughening, make the screens look a little bit dirtier. Contrast cranks up the contrast before running the image so that the output result is a more dense and higher contrast result. Flip actually is flipping your image upside down. So I like to use flip on just one layer. So if we flip, say, just the yellow channel, then we have one channel in the image that is flipped, like the screen was done upside down. That looks especially cool if you combine it with some offset value or even with offset and scale. So I'm going to delete this so that when we get to the portion of this where we do an example, you can see what I mean. I'm also going to apply contrast and roughen on all of these. Wave does, again, what it sounds like. It adds sort of a wave effect, which is nice for faking some offset if you don't want to manually set the offset. That's honestly what I use it for the most. It just kind of gives a little bit of variation in the screen so they don't line up perfectly. Grain adds grain to the image in all areas, so not only in areas that are already have ink, but also in areas that don't. So if you have a big blank area where your black channel is not affecting much, like in this image, it would probably be the sky, then adding grain is going to add grain to the black channel in the sky and even in some of this white area. So it's just bringing texture into areas that don't otherwise have it. Heavy is going to add additional saturation to a particular channel. So if we run heavy on, say, the yellow channel here, the yellow is going to be a little bit deeper saturated. It's going to have more of an impact. Invert doesn't invert the color, it inverts the area, it inverts the mask. So if we run invert here, then everything in our image that should be yellow will, it'll be the opposite of that. So the places where it should normally be yellow will be void of yellow, and the areas that have no yellow would have yellow. Static adds sort of this crazy wind effect. So if you've ever used filter stylized wind, stagger, you would be familiar with what the static effect does. It is this. Strokes adds kind of like pencil stroke look to the halftone pattern. Again, it's just kind of a cool way, like grain, to add texture to areas that otherwise wouldn't have much. And then threshold we've talked about, but threshold lets you use a slider to customize how much saturation you want for each screen. So you can run threshold not only on separations, but on any of the processing modes and have a bit more control over the screen saturation. Let's go ahead and run this and just see what we get. I'm curious because this is kind of an interesting set of effects here. I don't know if I've tried this particular combo necessarily. So we need to turn this off because in this case we're not using a spot color. Even though we have a layer selected, spot color is really more about using text or graphic or typography. So let's go ahead and click run. Okay, so here's what we get with all of those effects applied. Kind of a crazy result, not necessarily what I would be going for most of the time, but hey, it's completely up to you. That is the beauty of this whole thing. So I'm going to go into my separations group and just take a look at each individual layer so we can see what happens. So this is on the basic processing mode, and you can see that with the roughen and some of these other effects applied, even on the basic processing mode, we start to get that bleeding together of screens, which is definitely an improved effect over the series of dots that you would otherwise get. The yellow being inverted is definitely not helping our case here, so I'm going to flip that back around. And so you can see what the scale does. So it has taken our particular screen here and then just scaled it up twice like that. So if we scaled it back down and then flipped it, because we have the flip effect on, and then we also have an offset of 50, it looks like it's actually flipped the other way, but so that's what that is. Then we've got the magenta channel here, and the magenta channel had that contrast and roughen on it as well. So when you zoom in, you're able to see how the dots aren't perfectly round. They kind of have this damaged, ovally rough look to them. And then the same thing is going on with the cyan channel here. And so we're able to use effects and combine them, though I would suggest sparingly, to get some more interesting and more varied results. And of course we can save this to a preset if we wanted. But you know, after looking at it, I think I actually like how this looks better without the magenta and the yellow channel. And maybe we don't need these effects anymore because we're not actually running yellow. You don't have to do this. You can just leave them on if you'd like. And then I'm going to create a custom preset, and this is going to be called cyan black. And then if we wanted to run this cyan black preset now, we could import any image that we wanted from Unsplash. So I'll just go on Unsplash and download something else. This is kind of a cool image by Zhang Kiev, and I'm going to drag it into Photoshop, and then we will run our custom preset on this image and see what kind of result we get. So this is what it looks like if we run our custom preset now that we just built. And so we could continue importing however many images we wanted and running that custom preset on it. I think it is probably the best way to use Inklab, so I would suggest you take some time, build cool presets, and then use that preset library to your advantage. Another thing that I really like to do is after building a preset, I'll go through and I'll tweak it a little bit. So our presets are only sort of a starting point. They make the process of creation a little bit faster because we're not having to set everything from scratch every single time. But even when I'm working with presets, I still a lot of the time want to, customize them a bit further. Another thing that you can do after Inklab runs is go on and add further modifications to your screen. So in this case, I'm going to add a curves modifier with Control M, and then I'm going to make my screen a little bit darker. So now our black screen has a lot more saturation to it. It's definitely more visible. This time, the background texture I don't think is the one that I want, and so I can change that by going into my output group and then clicking the background texture here and selecting a different texture. I'm going to select the default texture there. I think that one looks pretty good. And so this is our result. And we got this in only a couple of seconds because we created a preset. I'd also like to take a minute to point out that when you run Inklab, it creates a snapshot for you. So you can see here I have this cyan and black snapshot, and then a 4-color process, and then a 4-color process, and so on. And so every time you click that play button and Inklab completes running, it takes a screenshot for you to go back and quickly see what result you got at each point and and it's also taking, because of my settings, a screenshot periodically at different times. So you might not have these ones. But so yeah, that's what that does, and I just want to point that out really quickly. Similarly, when you run Inklab, the output group name is set to whatever your preset name is. So in this case, cyan and black is showing up here. But if we were to run this on one of these Made by Motel presets, it would show Grindhouse there as the preset name and also in our history state so that we could easily go back and find the result from the Grindhouse effect in our stack here or in our history. I just went ahead and ran this on the Grindhouse preset here by Made by Motel, and I'm going to go into my separations and check this out a little bit. So I want to adjust the background texture. So what I'm going to do is just grab a different background texture, and then we can scale the background texture here to 200 if we want to bring out more of that texture. And then again, we can go into our separations and drag these sliders to customize how faded we want the result to look. So now we have something that looks like a much more faded, kind of worn in print, which for this particular case I like. Can toggle off these layers here. I'm going to go to my cyan and kind of saturate that with something different. I like that. And now I'll re-enable my yellow and maybe make it a different shade here. So we've got kind of this green and blue thing going on. Toggle off those shadows or that K channel and maybe make our shadows stronger. It's also a good time to point out what I meant by the shadows thing. So here in the windows, we have lots of small little details that with the K channel, we're not really going to get. So if I were to enable that here, you're not able to get a lot of those little details, but with the shadows, it definitely does a good job of recovering them. Last but not least, we have the Advanced panel. The Advanced panel is where you can set the resample value and choose the DPI of your image. So this is an important one. The DPI is probably the single most important setting to worry about. So you need to make sure that your image resolution is high enough for Inklab to utilize. It doesn't have to be 150, but if your computer can handle it, at least 150 is preferred. And if you're going to run it on an image with the DPI of 72, just make sure that the pixel dimensions of your image, you can see here mine are 7200 by 10,800 pixels, are high enough. We recommend using an image that is say 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels, or maybe On the low end, 2000 pixels. Hand in hand with the DPI setting is the density and size setting. So as you adjust your resample value or your DPI value here, you want to make sure that your density value is also in check. For example, if you are running Inklab on an image with a DPI of 72, then a density of 25 is going to be too much. And if you're running it on basic mode, then a size of probably 5.4 is going to be too small. So it's best to have your DPI and your size values in check. You know, those numbers, there's no science to how exactly it has to be, but kind of play around with it and figure out which values work for your particular image size so that you're getting the most detail possible out of Inklab. Finally, we have this output select, so we can output in RGB or in CMYK, whichever is desired. Directly beneath the advanced panel, we have the Inklab Footer, which shows our current version number, as well as gives us a link to the help docs and a button for us to see our licensing settings. So in here, you'll be able to see your Inklab version, the software version, as well as our serial key, and deactivate Inklab if we wanted to activate the same key on another device. Well, I hope this was helpful. I know it was a lot to cover in just one video, so thank you for bearing with me. If you have any questions at all regarding anything related to Inklab or Black Market or whatever, leave them in the comments below and we would be happy to help you with that. If you're new to the channel, please help us by liking this video and hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notifications when we post a new video. Links to all sorts of different stuff and more information can be found in the video description. Goodbye.